In today's Zentangle drawing session, we're going to take a look at a very simple technique for creating a stained glass effect. So in order to do it most easily, we're going to substitute our normal drawing pens with a very fine tip for something with a larger, broader point. Now I know this says fine point, but compared to our regular Zentangle drawing, you can see it's significantly larger. And the reason for that is we want to create very bold lines that are going to emulate the leading that is used in the stained glass appearance. And so we're going to start with that. No tile preparation is required, nor pencil in this beginning, because it's very simple. So working with your tile or your paper drawing surface of any kind, pick an area that's or a starting point that is not exactly in the center. We want to offset it a little bit to make it a bit more interesting. So I'm going to sort of choose right here off to the left, up a little bit, and I'm going to draw a simple asterisk shape. I'm going to go over that again because my pen made a little funny mark there. So I'm going to draw that simple line here, and then I'll cross that line, and then I'll turn this into an asterisk by simply drawing an X here as well. So now we've got our big old asterisk there, and we're going to draw up from each of those points. Kind of in your mind, pick a center spot and draw up and then back down, whichever works easiest for you. If you need to draw a dot there to target, but I think most of you will be able to imitate this process very simply. And you can see it's drawing a nice bold line. You could use a Sakura pen to be sure. They do have wider nibbed pens, 10s and 12s for example, which do make nice wide lines, but I just thought it might be easier to use a big Sharpie. Now from here we want to draw out in the same way, kind of picking that center point and back and forth to our points there, creating a larger star-like shape, but it's also going to be that framework for a stained glass pattern. Very simple. Nothing tricky about this. And it just naturally grows outward as we draw these shapes. And try to keep them consistently sized at each level here, but they don't have to be perfect by any means. And now from here we would do the same thing. So in this case it would go off our target, off our paper, but I'm going to just target that basic direction. Same here, it would come up that way. And again. Now here we'll be able to actually complete the piece, so I'm going to target it right about there. About there. And about there. One more. Targeting it out there. Like that. Now we can add one additional layer if we'd like. I think I will. These are all going to go off the paper, but it lets us make full use of this particular shape, and that's as far as we're going to go. Whoop, I got one I can do here. So by using that larger nibbed pen, we've been able to create the lead came, which is what these lines are called in stained glass assembly, and they're normally made of lead. It is pronounced lead came. That's what these lines are called, and it's what holds the individual pieces of stained glass together. Now, there are numerous ways that we could fill this in with colors or patterns and different things like that to help convince our eye of that stained glass appearance. I'm going to use a simple method here, and we'll discuss perhaps several other methods that could be used. I've selected 8 different colors of metallic gel pen. And those are going to be used to fill in these different shapes so that I have petals of each color, and it will just make the design hopefully more interesting. You could use less colors, fewer colors if you'd like, but what I've done here, just to use this as an example, when we created our initial shape, there are 8 petals. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that, of course, is duplicated as we go outward. So I'm going to use sort of a pattern that looks randomized but really won't be random to fill these with different colors as we go. Now, with the gel pens, depending on the thickness of the nib, it's fairly easy to create dots with these pens, and that's what we're going to use here to create this effect. So I'm going to just pick one of these pieces. I'm going to pick this one right here, and I'm going to fill that area with dots. Now, if it creates a pattern, that's fine, but we're not looking to make a particular pattern. Now, with the same color, I'm going to go up one level, so to the next larger size, and I'm going to go one step over. So I don't want to put it right next to the same color, and I'm going to fill that area in with dots. Now, you might, if you'd like, you could make altering sizes of dots, some a little thicker, some a little smaller, and that might help to create a more random appearance as well. And I know some of these metallic pens may be difficult to see on the camera, but I'll use other colors as we go, and it will make it easier for you to see. But next we'll do that, we'll go up to one level larger again, and one step over. So I don't want to put it right next to here, so I'm going over to this one. So there's like a space in between, so to speak, and I'm going to fill this area now with the dots as well. Oh, there goes my pen. There we go. And with gel pens, it just takes a light touch to get that ink to come out. All right. And now we've got one more size, so we're going to go up to that next size, skip one point or petal, and I'm going to begin putting dots here as well. And you can cover this as tightly or as loosely, so to speak, as you'd like. We just want to have the idea of some sort of color with texture to emulate a stained glass appearance. And this is just, like I said, one of many ways that we could do this, and we'll look at other options as well. So now we've gone out about as far as we can, except we do have a few spots where we have an outer. So I'm going to go up one more over to here, this next larger spot, and I'm going to fill that in as well. And that's all we need. That's as far out as our pattern goes. So I'll set this color aside, and we'll choose our next color. And we're going to repeat that same exact process. I'm just going to go right next to it, to where I started. And you can perhaps see that blue a little easier than the green. And then what did I do here? I'm going to go right next to it. I'm going to skip that same idea, but now we're doing it upwards in those size petals, just like we did with the first color. So now it's going to be easier to know where to go each time, because we're going to be able to emulate that or be consistent with that pattern. So now I'm going right next to this one. It's probably impossible for the human mind to actually randomize dot patterns like this because our brain just wants to put them together, and even subconsciously we create a pattern perhaps of some kind. But do your best to sort of randomize the placement of these, again to help with just a simple color indication obviously, but also with a texturing of this glass look. So we're done with that color. We can choose our next one, and we'll follow that same pattern again. We're going to just continue this until our stained glass is all covered. Last color here to add to our pattern. And what I'm doing occasionally with these pens, if you're not used to gel pens, sometimes the ball tip will seize up, and I just tap it lightly on a scrap paper to get that ink flowing again, and it usually will help. Of course, give it a little squiggle somewhere else and test it out, but that usually helps. To any dried gel ink in there will sometimes stop up that ball from rolling, and just giving it a light tap like that will help get it moving again. So it just helps that ink to come out better. Doesn't always work, but it most of the time does. And so now we have the basic pattern completed. We've got our lead cane lines, we have our stained glass texture and color, but now we're going to take a white gel pen and we're going to add a few dots and little highlights that will help make these lead lines or lead lines look more convincingly like stained glass. So let's just put a little dot where each intersection is, and this is not something that you see exactly like this in real stained glass, but this helps, believe it or not, convey that sense or that effect with our Zentangle simulation here. So we're going to add these little dots wherever the intersections of our lead cane lines would be. I'm putting one right there in the center as well. These don't have to be huge, but you want them discernible. So you don't want it to look like a mistake, like a little dot that you forgot to draw through or something. So make it large enough to distinguish itself. Sometimes our gel pens cooperate with their opacity and other times they don't. All right, I think we've got them all there, all those that are visible. All right, I think everything has dried sufficiently here for me to continue. And so I wanted to just comment. Now, in real stained glass, these lines, as I've been calling them, lead came lines. That is what they're known as. Now, if the stained glass artist uses brass or something like that, they're called foils. But the lead came lines are raised. They have volume or depth to them. And so if we imagine a light source hitting those, they may reflect light, but they may also cast a shadow, which will help with our stained glass effect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to imagine the light sort of coming from this angle and coming downward. So it's brightest over here. So that would mean this side of the line would not have a shadow, but this side of the line would. So we don't have to worry about it perfectly, but in order to make a convincing appearance, I'm going to add that little bit of shadow line along those areas where I think that light would cast a shadow. And once I blend that in, it will hopefully help with that effect of dimensionality, but also to convince the eye of a stained glass appearance. So remember, if the light's coming this way, this side is going to be in the light, but this side will be in the shadow. And that's the way we're going to look at that. So we may lose track of it as we go just because we're not trying to be ultra super detailed about our light sourcing. But if we try to obey that general rule, it's going to help with a dimensional effect. So I'm just adding a little bit of this graphite along those areas where I think that shadow will be cast, and then we can blend that a little further to help enhance that effect. So just adding that shadow and trying our best to obey those light sourcing rules, which in Zentangle is usually not a concern, as I've mentioned before. But when we're trying to create a particular effect with our drawing or our art, we can use the Zentangle method to help us, but we can also use traditional art techniques to enhance our drawings and add some fun effects or realism to that. So don't ever let the art method that you're using limit you. Zentangle is a wonderful thing, and feel free to enjoy all of its aspects, but you don't have to be bound to it or locked into it in some way that itself becomes a restriction to your creativity or to your drawing. That's not what we want when we set out using Zentangle to help us be creative. We don't intend that it's going to limit us in some way. So don't be afraid of those things. Now we can take our paper stump or our blending tool and we can add a little bit of smoothness to these lines and kind of enhance those shadow marks a bit. Now what we can do is we can take our gel pen and we can add a few highlights to the opposite side on these lead came lines. So we don't want to trace the whole thing. That would just sort of undo those lines a little bit. But we can add just a tiny hint. Let me get my pen working here. A tiny hint of a highlight here and there that may just help the eye be convinced that we've got some light coming through this process. Just a few little highlights here and there. Doesn't have to be everywhere, of course. But on the opposite side of where we've made our shadows, by doing that, it's going to create almost an embossed look, but certainly it will create a highlighted and reflective appearance. And that, again, is just going to help our eye to see a little bit of a dimension and a little bit of that light sourcing. It's going to make a little more sense to the eye when we see it properly carried out there. So that is one very simple way that we can create a humble representation of a stained glass image. And of course you could use this same principle with any sort of tangle pattern. I just used this simple star pattern here because it was easy to create and it very effectively shows a stained glass sort of perception there. But here I'd like to show you a second very simple method for creating a stained glass appearance using solid colors. So here I've drawn the shape and the pattern of the Dreamcatcher again so that we have a base to start with. And then you'll notice that right away I've moved here to the shading or adding the graphite for the shadow effects. This is a new technique that we haven't used before here on this channel, but it's an age-old technique in painting and other forms of art called underpainting. By laying down the shadow first on our drawing, then when we add color, that top color will take on that shadow and little hints of darkness without having to use a secondary darker color to add that shadow. If we had added the graphite on top of the colors, it would have also added the shadow, but it would have washed out or eliminated the color. But doing it in the opposite direction, it allows the color to remain and to just assume that slightly darker shadowed area without actually diminishing the color. Looks like I missed a piece there, so I'm filling that in. And adding here now the final color. Now once that is done, I added the highlights, very similar to what we did in the first case, but I just added them in a little different way and without the dots. I wanted to just create true highlights along those lead came lines. And here I'm using the same color pens that I initially laid down the color with, but it now has dried underneath, and so by adding these random patterns to the top, it emulates or duplicates that stained glass texturing that you will often see on true stained glass art. And then as a final step, I'm just adding an outside shadow to the entire Dreamcatcher shape as it lays there on the paper, since I didn't fill it all the way to the edge. And so here are two completed versions of this stained glass star using completely different techniques. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed taking a look at the stained glass creation. Today we used a couple different methods. Hopefully you find one or both of them fun and engaging to use in your own art. But with that, we will end today's session, and I thank you so very much for joining with me today, and I look forward to seeing everyone again real soon back here in the Tangles and Toons channel. Until then, take care. Bye-bye now.